You're listening to the IB4E Coaching Podcast.
Brought to you by IB4E Coaching, business coaching for executives, entrepreneurs, and small business professionals. Learn more at ib4e-coaching.com.
Hey, Coach Harlan here. Welcome back to the podcast. Hope you guys are having a phenomenal week. I'm having a great week, and I'm excited to introduce you to my guest today. Please help me welcome Tobey Wyatt. Tobey Wyatt builds clarity out of chaos. As a founder of Motherlode, she helps scaling organizations untangle messy operations, align their teams, and build systems that actually work without burning people out in the process. A former behind-the-scenes number 2 turned operator in her own right, Tobey brings deep experience across startups, enterprises, and everything in between. She's scaled teams by 500%, driven 900% revenue growth, and saved execs thousands of hours, all while championing trust, transparency, and human-first leadership. She lives in Chicago with her partner, Damien, a fellow ops geek, and 3 daughters, and speaks and writes about operations, communications, and neurodivergence in the workplace. Tobey's core belief: every leader deserves a safe, judgment-free space to work through challenges, bring their full humanity, and build smarter, not harder. Tobey, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. Wonderful to be here.
Yeah, this is awesome. All right. I've got to ask, seriously, 500% growth and unlock 900% revenue growth. How is that even possible?
Well, so numbers look great when you're dealing with startups, right?
Okay.
When you go into the corporate space at Boeing, certainly those aren't the kind of numbers, although there was some pretty ginormous fundamental transformations happening while I was at Boeing. So there was pretty radical shifts in the numbers in the team that I supported. But when you start with 5 people, right, 5 times growth is 25 people. So, it sounds very great to put it in a percentage. And, that's what you can do when you're playing with statistics and startups.
Still, that is awesome growth. Congratulations on that. That's awesome.
Thank you.
And triple team size, cutting hiring times in half. Hiring times is one thing that a lot of my clients deal with. I work a lot with commercial and residential contractors. Trying to hire people is just like an impossibility for them. So that's awesome. Very cool.
Yeah. And a lot of it is just sort of, we've convoluted the system. And so just clearing out some of the nonsense, creating clarity in the process, a lot of it sort of takes care of itself. And then it's just really making sure that you've done your homework and things do get a lot simpler.
Nice. Yeah. Simplicity. Good job. All right. I want to dive into all this stuff because you've got so much in your background, so many things, cool things you're doing. I want to talk to you about Motherlode because your website is still in the process of being built up, right?
It is. And it may be in that process for a bit, but yeah, it is.
Okay. That's all right. We'll talk about it. But before we get started, I've got 10 questions that I like to ask each of my guests. Now, these are the questions made famous on the TV show Inside the Actor's Studio, where the host James Lipton asks these same questions of his Hollywood guests from TV, film, and stage. And I figure if they're good enough for the Hollywood elite, they're certainly good enough for my guests. So Tobey, if you're ready, I've got 10 questions for you.
Let's do it.
All right. Question number 1, what is your favorite word?
So I would love for that to be a beautiful, like complicated, very smart word, but I feel like I have to go with the word that I use incessantly on repeat, which is there's some sort of tick that I have where when I finish thinking through something, I verbally say out loud, okay, or all right. And so if you're around me ever, you will realize how often I am saying that. And it really does nothing for the people around me because it's a tick that I am saying out loud for something that is happening in my head. I really like to, so for a slightly better answer, probably, I really like to use a lot of adjectives. And so like, oh, that's really beautiful, or, oh, fabulous. You'll hear me sort of throw those out just so that I inject some energy into the conversation.
Very cool. All right. We'll be listening for the tick during the podcast. What is your least favorite word?
So I don't know that I have truly a least favorite word, but I know that can't is one. My girls know there is nothing that sort of shortens my temper more than watching somebody give up. And so with my girls, if they act helpless or if they act like they can't do something and suddenly they don't know how to put on a shoe that they've been putting on for months at a time now, that it sends me into sort of a unreasonable response time. And so that can't word is something that I really struggle with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. What turns you on?
I've actually got recent experience with this because I feel like I've been through a long phase of off and just recently have really activated on. And so when my brain is exhausted at the end of the day, nothing feels better than that. And I am so energized and pumped by big problems that have meaty solutions. And so I think some things that probably other people don't like, living in ambiguity and whatever, that stuff, I crave it, I think. And so, yeah, turns me on.
Nice. What turns you off?
Repetitiveness. I really struggle. And so that's one of the problems with sometimes being an operator inside an organization is after you've come in and you have the fresh set of eyes and you've made all the improvements, really what it should be then is just running the ship, keeping a smoothly running machine going. And nothing is worse to me than just doing the same thing over and over again.
All right. What sound or noise do you love?
I would say I do love music. I'm a big fan. We listen to a lot of musicals in my family, and so that the sound of my girls singing together with some of these like the musical Six, right? It's maybe a little advanced for some of their ages, and you've got these little tiny voices singing some just really cool tunes. So I love it.
Nice. What sound or noise do you hate?
Crying. I've been a parent for so long. Like it's true. Just and I will be very specific. It's not crying about something's wrong, but it's sort of that whiny, like I want to insert an opinion about something that really I should just do. That it's very irritating.
Yep. I'm with you. All right. Question 7. What is your favorite curse word?
So my mom gave me I was on my path to being a very prolific swearer when I was probably 11, 12 years old. And my mom gave me some great advice that sort of changed my direction on that. So I don't swear often. I will say it's sort of maybe trying to creep back in because my husband is much more of a swearer than I am. And so I do absorb things that are around me. I would say, yeah, the dang it, or things like that. Or unfortunately, I don't even know why, because but most people do consider it a curse. The taking the son of the Lord's name in vain seems to be one that comes out an awful lot. I'm not sure why.
We watch a lot of British television, so you hear some very creative terms. Awesome. Very good. All right. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
So I've sort of thought about trying this on the side, but I'm not sure if I have the time right now. But voice acting. I would love to get into voice acting.
Nice. Very cool. What profession would you not like to do?
Something where you're in a box. I think, your typical stereotypical, right, accountant job or stereotypical lawyer job, even where it's like the same, you're just sort of attacking the same challenge day after day. You're researching the same sort of things day after day. That would drive me nuts.
Yep. The factory production line where you're putting a bolt in, slide it down, put a bolt in, slide it down. Yeah. I'm with you. All right. What profession would you not like to do? Is that the one I just asked you?
I think you just asked me that one.
All right. Let's pause for a second. I will edit that out. Perfect. All right. Final question. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
So little of it mattered. I think for me, my struggle with religion in general is that we have made it this huge rule set, which I feel like there's reason to believe that it's not that in the first place. And so the grace that I expect to be there and actually seeing that live of, yeah, you excluded a lot of people from this list, but look at who all is here. That's what I would want to see.
Very cool. Good job. All right. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, I want to talk about how you got your start, how you made these amazing changes and help these companies like you do, some of the things you have going on right now and how you work with people, how you help them. And at some point, we'll transition into courage and leadership. Okay.
Yes.
Awesome. All right. So we're going to talk about all that and more right after this. So listeners, stick with us. And I'm back with my guest, Tobey Wyatt. Tobey, thanks again for taking time out to speak with us. Where are you calling from? Where are you in?
Chicago, Illinois.
Chicago.
In the heart of the city.
Very nice. Very cool. We were up there one time, froze to death. That wind coming off the lake, it was just, I don't know what it was, but you walk between buildings and this icy wind just cuts through you. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember one day there was a doctor I used to work with wore a pair of glasses, and his glasses flew off of his face from the wind. I feel like that's a pretty impressive feat.
Yeah. Yeah, I grew up in Southern California. We didn't really have weather, to speak of. So yeah. We had 4 seasons: fire, flood, earthquake, and drought. that was pretty much it. So you specialize in helping CEOs reduce operational burdens. Give me an example of some of the things you help them with. What are you seeing out there?
I think one of the obvious answers to that is building a business off the network of sheets. So a lot of the businesses I work with are Google workspace companies. And so they have this huge interwoven, sometimes complicated, sometimes not very complicated or sophisticated, but everything's in sheets and everything's somewhere, and you don't really know where anything is at any given time. But on that is how the company operates. And so just trying to create some sanity. One of the common problems I solve is creating a single source of truth, which is in a few seconds, you should be able to find any answer you're looking for whether it's the latest version of a document, whether it's how a process is done, who's responsible for what, anything like that. And I think the amount of time wasted by just sort of having things in all these disparate places is one of the first challenges.
Yeah, as a consultant, my wife and I are consultants, and go into these companies and they have a different system. No one system of record, right? They have all these different systems. They don't talk to each other. You have to pull information out of this system and plug it into this system, which every time you touch it, there's a possibility of errors going in. It's mind-boggling. It's like one system, people. It doesn't seem like it's that tough. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's, these systems get created when you're small or when it makes sense. And because it's never a good time to go and revisit operations, they just get band-aided and band-aided and band-aided until you realize that how complex of a system you've ended up creating, when it could be so much simpler if you had designed it from that moment in time. But it's very, very challenging to actually pause long enough as a leader of an organization to see with that level of clarity what's in front of you.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and getting rid of systems that they've lived with for so many years, it's scary. It's like, well, I don't know how this is going to work now. I understand this system that we have as glued and bubble gum and duct tape together. I know how it works. And they're afraid when you come in and start changing things around. Wow.
Yeah.
You talk about the importance of strategic advisories for CEOs. You're a trusted advisor. What should a CEO look for when they're looking for a trusted advisor?
So it's a fantastic question. And really, there's a couple basics. One, you are looking for somebody with a knowledge set. Unfortunately, the coaching and advising industry is filled with lots of people, and they may or may not have the solutions to the problem you need. And I think it's really hard to wade through that, because it's really actually hard to know what I know. I can say a couple key things. I can make it sound good. I can throw out some great statistics. I can put out some things, but there's so much that goes into running a business, and there's so much that is individual to the business. And it's very hard to assess a very wide group of people and figure out which of them are going to be the best resources for you. So the best thing I can suggest in getting started is One, you should feel like this person can respond very quickly to the challenges that you're facing. So even in a half-hour conversation, they should be able to grasp the problems that you have and maybe even give you some preliminary starting points for how to address some of those things. You do want somebody who listens, because that is one of the biggest hurdles I think that a lot of people face with operators. Is some operators really feel like, I have my tool set down, I know what works and I know what doesn't. And in my viewpoint, that's really just not how businesses work. They are groups of individuals that have specific needs. I think I'm constantly living in the tension of nobody's nearly as special as they think they are, and every situation is unique, right? So there's a sweet spot in there where certain tools really are applicable to certain situations and not to others. And so I have to hear the context of, why did it come out like this? Why did you get where you're going? What would really be helpful? And so that's the real challenge, is somebody who listens before they propose an answer, and somebody who has some answers pretty quickly. And then the third one is really just personality. With all of this stuff, it really is about who doesn't grate on your nerves to listen to, right? And there's just sort of this you can't put your finger on it, but you know it when you feel it, you know it when you see it, of this is working.
Yeah. Just that comfort level and trust level that are coming in. They're actually there to help you, right? Because you're right, working with other consultants, a lot of times they come in already, this is what we're going to do here. It's like, you haven't taken time out to ask any questions. You haven't done any kind of assessment. You don't know what they've already tried and what's failed in the past. As a business coach, I try to start off with those questions. What are you doing now? What have you tried? And try to come up with something that's going to work for them. It may be different, but something specifically to their situation. Yeah, I think that's critical. One of the biggest differences in leadership challenges between large corporations and then the smaller startup businesses.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I love the fact that I have seen the different sides of the universe, to go from a micro organization that's growing into a small organization, and then having worked at a household name of Boeing and USAA. I think the really interesting thing is, everybody sort of talks about how there's benefit of being in that corporate setting, because you have the assistance of scale, you have the buying power of a much larger organization, so you can implement more tools, you have more resources that you can just deploy on a specific problem. And that therein lies the rub for a lot of the problems that I saw, which is, when I worked at a very small organization and I was the number 2 of the organization, I wore 5 hats, right? Any marketing that went out the door, I did that. I did all of the bookkeeping and finance and accounting. I did all of the HR work for that organization. Really anything besides the client work, I touched and handled and at least managed, if not did myself. And I can stay aligned inside my own brain. It's this lovely thing of all those dots connect when I'm thinking about these various things. But at a large organization, at a corporation, you can go to a leadership team meeting. And I remember sitting in some of, for example, the top level HR meetings at Boeing. So this is your CHRO and her direct reports, and sitting in on some of those meetings and hearing how they go. And they sound like they're fully aligned. And then I, as chief of staff, would walk away and watch how different it got interpreted as soon as you got a level away and a layer away. And so all of a sudden now the organization feels like it's running against each other, or it feels like people are out of alignment. And so that is the biggest challenge, I think, for most corporations, is how do you keep that feedback loop and information cycle as open as possible, because there's a huge amount of information and one person can't do it. And yet, when you don't have that feedback loop very open, you run into real challenges of a lot of wasted effort. And I think another one that I notice of the transition from a small organization to a larger organization is, we still think in terms of full-time labor a lot of times. And so when I have a pinch point at my organization and I go, I need somebody to do something, whatever that is, right? I need this taken off of my plate. we oftentimes in our history have gone out and just hired a full-time person to do whatever that job is. And oftentimes we didn't originally need a full-time person. And the human psychology of it is that that person that gets hired wants to demonstrate that they're doing a good job. They're not just going to sit there and go, well, I only have 20% of a job, so let me only do 20% of work, and then it's fine. The person is going to want to find stuff to do so that they do well. And that means the minute that you go beyond, you have new work at your organization, you don't have somewhere to put it. And so you hire another full-time person and you just start getting this bloat upon bloat upon bloat that you never really recognize because it seems like everybody's busy. It seems like everybody's doing great things. And so really taking advantage, I think one of the power of small organizations right now is to really take advantage of fractional work, whether that is fractional executive work. And I think that's a huge area of benefit for people is get the executive you need. If that's a 20% executive, get a 20% executive. Don't hire that full-time resource. That's a huge drain on your resources. And if you don't need it, you don't need it. And but also part-time labor as well, of just making sure you hire what it is you actually need at the moment. And then you can always change it going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, bring in somebody to fix that. Don't hire somebody and then you're stuck with this person. It's like, oh, I made this hire. I have to keep them around. I have to keep them busy. And you end up just, sheesh. I've seen that happen a bunch. A lot of business owners struggle with scaling their operations, right? We're talking about maintaining efficiency. What are some of the key systems or processes that can help a business scale successfully? Because I know a lot of businesses that try to scale and they do it too fast. They're growing too well. There's a difference between growing and scaling, right? Scaling is doing more with what you have, not adding locations, adding people, and things like that, right? That's my definition, my interpretation. Do you agree with that?
I think there's a lot of interpretations out there. So you kind of got to dig at what people are saying when they say scale, because I think a lot of scaling, yes, you're doing more with what you have, meaning you've taken off in a certain area, but adding a product line, some people's going to call that a scale versus a growth. So I think there's a lot of confusion about what growth is versus scale. I do think that I am probably more aligned with what you're talking about of, we're being more successful at what we have, and we have to figure out how to be more successful with the system that works or add to it to support it.
Yeah. To me, scaling is the efficiencies, right? To do or growth costs money, right? Because you're buying more people, more equipment, more vehicles, whatever it happens to be. You're growing, and so the financial need is bigger. Scaling, I think that's one of the things that a lot of businesses don't understand. You can get a person like you, somebody that comes in and can look at where are the inefficiencies, where is the bloat, how can we streamline these processes to get more out of what you're doing.
Yeah. And that's a lot of the work that I do is people sort of think the only solution is growth, right? I have to hire new people or I have to get, new things. And you have to have that combo of the money coming in the door matches the additional outlay you need to spend. And hopefully doesn't match it, dollar for dollar. It's not linear, but that you're not trying to pre-spend the money. Now, sometimes you do need to have those investment moments where, we have to invest now. And what we will find is that in order to get a future scale or growth possible, we have to do that. But I think that it ends up being the confusion is people force growth when they could find scale and efficiency.
Yeah, definitely. So you advocate for people-centered operational solutions. How can leaders balance operational efficiency with fostering a strong company culture?
I think that is fundamental. And that's one of the reasons I do a lot of HR work, not because I love the HR field, to be honest. Like, I think one of the jobs I maybe should have said is things I didn't want to do would be a truly HR person, right? Like an HR generalist. And I think that's because for the most part, that field has been limited by what people actually think that it should be. But I think, sorry, my brain just
That's okay.
What was the question again? It left
Just
the question.
how can leaders balance operational efficiency with fostering a strong company culture?
Perfect. Okay. So, part about HR. I think what happens is a lot of small business owners are not naturally managers. They're really good at something they do, and then they find themselves in this management role. And what we know about companies is that they are fundamentally, most companies are fundamentally about the talent that you have on site. It's usually your biggest line item of expense. And it's usually the success or failure of the teams, and the ability to work together and communicate is the success or failure of your organization. Most of us aren't building widgets in a factory setting such that the robots are, taking over and doing all of it. We rely on our humans. And so I think the challenge therein lies that a lot of CEOs are not skilled managers. That wasn't what they wanted to do. And yet that is the crux of the success of their organization. And so most of them are so desirous to do right by their people. It's certainly the people I like to work with most. They really want to do well by the people that they have. And they don't really know what that means, right? And so a lot of times they get over permissive or over generous, thinking that if I'm just nice enough to my people, or if I give them enough chances, they'll figure it out. And what we find is that actually means that you're delaying certain decisions, so that you're actually poisoning the company culture, because people think, oh, well, that person gets away with that kind of work. Why am I working so hard over here? So it is really, really vital that organizations focus on culture early and often. That one of the fundamental things of that I think often gets forgotten is performance management. When you're a tiny organization, it just sort of feels like, I don't need that, right? I talk to my people. I know how they're going. They know how I feel about them. And even at a tiny organization, you should still have performance management, if for nothing else than exercising the muscle. And the muscle often is not just what are my relationships like with these people, but do I even understand the definition of success? And do they understand the definition of success? And getting alignment on that, and actually having those open communications and conversations about that, is just something that I think a lot of people miss. And so everybody thinks we're all in alignment because we have these conversations. And what you find is, when you start actually creating metrics, when you actually start putting performance management and doing self-evaluations and group evaluations and peer evaluations and engagement surveys and all of those things that are really helpful at the larger organizations, we find that there is actually far more lack of alignment. And that lack of alignment is what almost always is the first killer of culture.
Yeah. Alignment kills it. Yeah. Working on projects where, like you said, in the big meetings, everybody's nodding their head. You think, oh, we're all aligned. No, you're heading the same direction I am, but we're not aligned.
Right.
They think this is what we should be doing. So they're pulling resources and things off this direction. Somebody else is pulling off that direction. Next thing you know, it's all broken.
Yeah. And one of the things I do like to say on repeat is clarity is kindness. So a lot of people want to be kind, but they think that kindness is niceness, right? Just I'm generous, or I say, kind thing, or I do the compliment sandwich. But really being very clear, which sometimes is saying the very hard things, is the actual kindness, because otherwise resentments grow and you're operating from a point where it's slipping out. So that niceness is a facade. Kindness is genuinely, we are aligned. You understand what I think, and I get to hear what you think.
Yeah. And that's one of the other things we used to do going into companies is we call it a crosswalk, but it's basically, here's the terminology we're going to use. What does that mean for you? To make sure everybody's on the same page, because you could have people saying the same words, totally different meanings.
What I found very fascinating is because I wore multiple hats in multiple places, I came to understand the difference of vocabulary of different groups of people. So when you are putting an HR person together with a marketing person, or you're putting the finance person together with, the CEO, those two should be able to talk. If they've done their job well, they should have it. But the other groups, they talk past each other, not with each other. So they're using vocabulary that they think means something together. And it's just really important to notice those and have somebody that can be your translator bridge of going, hey, hang on. I know your speak and I know your speak. And because of the the words you're saying around it, I know that you sound like you're aligned and you're not. So let's break that down and get to a common vernacular here.
Absolutely. Remote work. A lot of the businesses you work with, you see them starting to come back in to the offices, or they still have remote teams?
All of the companies I have been working with more recently are fully remote teams and plan to stay fully remote.
Okay, nice.
No intentions to be anything other than that. I think for small businesses, unless there is a collaborative benefit to the work that they do that really would benefit from in person, it is a strategic advantage to build your company as a remote first company. And so that right now is the group of people I'm working with.
Nice. What are some of the best practices for maintaining productivity and engaging the employees and stuff in remote or hybrid work environments?
So one of the oft forgotten things I think is task management. I think time management and task management, we sort of assume, well, if you're a good worker, you've got that figured out. And I think it's an assumption that actually really does not serve us well. And so understanding time management and task management are a lot about assumptions. And so again, it loops back to this open feedback, alignment, all of this stuff. Most of the work that I do does. And it's really that if it's all together in a system or a dashboard and we're all playing off of the same cards, then you start to see those misses of alignment. And so, and you get to start to have input to people's time management. So realizing, oh, I thought we stopped that work forever ago, but that's what you're spending a lot of your time on. Anyway, so having a common system for task management, I'm a big fan of ClickUp simply because it's task management that you can pair very nicely and easily with documentation. Other systems allow you to do that as well. And so a lot of the recommendations I'm making to small organizations is really getting your tasks in there, because then you can make sure the handoffs go smoothly. Right. You can see where things are in the process, and you're not spending meetings getting information about where things are. You can actually spend your meetings talking about the problems and the challenges and having the conflict.
Nice. Yeah, we used to talk to them about, here's a flow diagram of how your business works. And it's not the blocks that'll give you trouble. It's that little arrow in between, the handoffs.
100%.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And defining the deliverable that feeds somebody else's input, right? And just making sure that's very clear. Absolutely.
Right format that they need and everything like that. Yeah, absolutely. Is it more difficult to build that company culture and that culture of trust and things that you were talking about in a remote situation, or can that be done?
If I honestly look at it, I honestly am not sure that the remote part of that is the fundamental difference. And what I mean by that is, yeah, it's easier to be in the same room and read somebody's body language. I'm a big fan of cameras always on, right? So, and that's a really interesting challenge. And I think one of the very important things about that is recognizing that some people need permission to turn their self view off, because we've never lived in a culture where people see themselves as often. And I think, especially for female people, that can be a real challenge where they've built up some self-confidence issues. And so having to look at yourself all the time means I'd rather just have the camera off. I'm not looking for what you look like. I'm not looking for how well your makeup's done or how well your hair is done. I'm looking for all of the nonverbal cues that you give me by being on camera. So if you have a cameras on approach, the thing that on camera doesn't do for you is those random one-off meetings, right? Of I could just pick up and go to your place and sort of insert myself. That has both advantages and disadvantages, right? We can allow people to focus better because we schedule things. But when we talk about culture in particular, it's really about the quality of the communication. And I think one of the interesting misnomers I have felt is that people think that in person somehow gives you better trust, better clarity, better communication fronts. And if you're going to be opaque, if you're going to be, lacking of trust, you're going to do that in an in-person environment or not. The hard part for some organizations is if the leadership of that organization fundamentally distrusts remote work, then you're going to have the problem. It's not actually the remote work that's the problem. It's that I have an embedded deep distrust of what people are doing And that shows itself by, I've already given you a level of distrust when, you've come in the door.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've worked for groups like that, where if you're not sitting right in front of me to where I can keep an eye on you, you're probably doing something. It's like my mom. So you're
Yeah.
probably doing something you shouldn't be, right?
Well, and
Um,
it's the really tragic example of, we have for so long used metrics that were really easy and really horrible measures of success. So, you have the old adage, first in the door, last to leave. And, the butts in the seats are the ones that get, the attention. And they could be Amazon shopping for 12 hours a day and just look like great employees because they're there. And so that's because we are so weak at actually doing great metrics. We use these really weak measures to define success. And so that's what has to be done. And that's one of the reasons to do performance management early. So you get used to, what are the metrics that actually are meaningful and matter?
Yep. Yeah. You're talking about performance indicators, right? KPIs. I try to use KRIs also, the results. You could do the thing. Yes, you're supposed to do this 10 times a day. I am doing it 10 times a day. If it's not producing the result you're after, then it's a waste of time.
Right.
We need to find something else. So yeah, I like to look at both.
Yeah. And it's an interesting space to play in, because you've got all the people's baggage coming in the door about all this stuff. And so you have to acknowledge and address that, because a lot of people come in the door going, a metric means something that if I don't make it, there's a punishment or a consequence. And so I'm a big fan of stretch goals, right? Let's set a stretch goal. And if I do that, I have to very much work with leadership to say, when we don't hit this goal, that's normal. That's what we expect. But if we didn't set it, we're not likely to try to achieve it. But then we have to educate all of the individual contributors, all of the managers, to gain that trust of, this is what it means to fail at a stretch goal. And how do then we complement that with things that we do believe you can make, so that you do build that confidence of, I am doing a good job. And I know that.
Yeah. Yeah. My clients, we set up a scorecard. So each week we're checking the metrics. Did you make it or not? And if you didn't make it, do you understand why?
Yeah.
And as long as you understand the why, if it's a surprise to you, then we have a problem. If you understand what happened and you can explain it away, then fine, we can move on. But
yeah. And that's the story behind data, and forgetting that data is never complete without the story.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you could give a piece of advice to business owners looking to improve their leadership and their operational strategies, what would it be?
I think it's, remember that your role as CEO can be anything you want it to be. It's one of the few roles in an organization that very few things are actually required out of that role. You can hire around for just about anything. So if you really like being a manager, if you want to be in touch with your people and you want to be internal, then you hire a sales team, you hire fundraisers, you hire those external people that go tell the story. If you are really great at communicating with, the people who you want to invest in your organization, or finding partnerships, or, whatever, then you hire for the internal work. And I think so often people just sort of get locked into, I'm the CEO, this is what it means. And it's just so sad, because that is the one role that it doesn't mean that. You aren't locked into just about anything, but you do have to invest in support. And that's always the challenge of, get a coach or advisor first, and they can help you determine what is actually worth spending your money on now. So you're not just throwing at a dartboard and goes, well, I guess I need a COO now. You might not.
Yeah.
That might not be the best next investment for you.
Yeah, very true. Good stuff. All right, courage. Let's talk about courage. We talk about, where do you find the courage to leave the comfort of the 9-to-5 job to start your own business? That takes a lot of courage for people. Becoming a keynote speaker, writing a book, things like that take a certain amount of courage. Where did you find your courage to go out and start your business?
Yeah. So some of it was sort of forced upon me, and some of it has been the journey since then. And so I think what has been interesting is, I was in a situation, I think if you had asked me in my, early 30s, if I'd ever would have been out of work for a period of time, I just would have thought you were crazy. Like, I'm a great interviewer. If people talk to me, they want to hire me. And I just had this very bravado sense of, like, I'm finding work's not going to be a problem. And in the pandemic, I was laid off for the first time by Boeing. And it took me a year of very proactive work to find another job. And I had, I think, over 100 interviews and, work projects that I did. And I got to like the final steps of multiple processes. And either no one was hired or they selected a different candidate or, what have you. And so that was my first shakeup. And it really destroyed my confidence. Especially by the end of it, because you're just like, I'm getting up to do more interviews and submit more resumes and try to talk to these people. And what's the point? I've been at this for so long now. Clearly there's something wrong with me. And, that was a point in time. And I think that's the real struggle of the job search process. The way we've created it is it's very dehumanizing, and just very difficult to stay resilient in the face of that. And I can be resilient, but resilient and maintaining your confidence are two very different things. And I think that's really important to identify. And then I started work at USAA and, within 3 months of doing the work was laid off again. And,
Wow.
These were, for both organizations, pretty much laying off entire job codes. Like there was no real opportunity to save my role, right? It was everybody like me was headed out. And operations wise, that happens at a lot of organizations. You get sort of overbloated and you go, well, I can't lose the people who frontline do the work. So
Right.
operations staff, you're the one to go. And I can understand both sides of that coin. I think it can shoot a lot of people in the foot because these are your people actually figuring out how to make everybody else work together.
Right.
And you don't really notice that they're doing a good job or a bad job until it's gone, right? Like, or especially the good job. A lot of good operators, you have no idea how hard they're working until it's gone, and you go, "Oh my gosh, yeah!" Like everything's now so complicated. So that was the start of the process. 2 layoffs in 2 years really rocked the boat, and I realized for the first time, sadly, probably that jobs aren't stable. Like I sort of had it embedded in my mind, right? Like I can do this for as long as I want. I will leave this organization when I'm ready. And that really shook my understanding of stability. And I had a family that I needed to provide for. And so I didn't know that there was stability in entrepreneurship. I didn't expect that, but at least I had sort of the reins in my own hands. And so it was really the motivation of, let me differentiate the people who are paying me. So if any one organization isn't paying me, then I'm not out back on the street, trying to figure a new job. So that was sort of the side that was provided to me. Since then, it's been really interesting because the company that I built in my head when I decided to go out for my own, unfortunately, I came to realize over a long period of time that took a lot of courage, like you're talking about, realizing I was building a company on all of my weakest qualities. And it's because I know fundamentally that a lot of reasons that operations falls apart is because of poor execution. And so I figured I've got to be in the middle of execution. That's where I have to be in order to solve these problems. I couldn't imagine anything worse at the time than listening to somebody week after week after week tell me a problem and trying to convey a solution and then just listening to them continue to be in that problem. That is a horrifying sort of concept for me. And so I thought, okay, so I wanted to build sort of a managed services approach to operations for small companies, right? So they don't have enough to hire a full-time operator. They certainly don't need an operations team with a COO and, different people underneath them. So let me provide them sort of what I called ops in a box for them. And the value proposition just isn't there because a lot of these organizations, they don't know what good operations look like. So they don't know what investing in that would do for them. And there's a proliferation of VAs out there right now, virtual assistants. And unfortunately, one of the really awful things that I've noticed is we're having VAs do work that really should be handled by more qualified operators. And so I was up against sort of this challenge over and over again and realized, that's not it. But the courage to think that I could make money by talking to people took me a long time to get around, right? I sort of come from a blue collar. My mom's an RN. My dad was a pastor. You get there by work. You're being paid for your time, which I guess with a pastor, you would think that, he's paid for his sermons, but I saw how hard he worked. And, so that's what you're being paid for. You're being paid for your time or your deliverables. And so the idea that my deliverable comes out of my mouth really took me a long time to come around. And it was really just seeing over and over again the response to people when I would talk to them and just realizing that's where they really light up. That's where they really love what I do. I've got to lean into that and not just, run away from it.
Yeah, they're looking for that clarity. They're looking for, they may know in their own mind, this is what I should be doing.
Yeah.
But to hear it from somebody on the outside, seeing things that maybe they haven't seen, but it reinforces or changes their mind. They're not paying for your hour of time. They're paying for your 20 years of experience that you give to them in that hour. And that's the big difference.
Yeah. And that took a long time to sort of, and especially because as a good operator, right, you see a problem, you solve a problem, right? You see a need, fill a need. And so, I can help people get started on solving the problem. I do not have to be there every step along the way and do something that, frankly, other people can do faster than me. Other people can do, in a better way. Handing off the work is really important too.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you look for in a leader?
For me, I look for people who are constantly listening and constantly learning and understanding that their understanding of a situation is a perspective and being willing to account for the other perspectives in the room. That, I think, when you can do that, you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You don't have to have all the answers. But when you are blocked from understanding that when I say something, I know that you heard this or that, or, that's what you should have taken away. Those who really sort of lean into I don't understand why you can't. They're not coachable. They're not trainable. They oftentimes are going to sour the culture of the organization because they can't hear what their people really need to tell them.
Yeah. And that's tough. I've been in situations where I've had to recommend that they let someone go at that leadership level that sat in the meetings nodding their heads, go back to their team and say, they have no idea what they're talking about. They're all crazy. They're going to lead us to ruin and everything. And yeah, just not willing to, number one, have the courage to admit, I don't know, or have the courage to say, I don't have the answers. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's tough.
Oh, gosh.
What kind of leader are you? We'll pause. There you go.
Yeah.
You're back.
Okay. What kind
of leader are you? If I talk to some of your colleagues or people you work with in the past, or some of the teams that you're working with now, and ask them what type of leader you are, what would they tell me?
I think they would say that I am an over communicator. I'm a big fan of, I'm going to say it 5 times because hopefully when I've repeated myself for the 5th time, like we are all in alignment by then. I try to be succinct. And so that is a inherent challenge of over communicating and really making sure I've provided clarity, but also not sort of rehashing over and over again what I've said. That I want to gain context all the time. I'm asking a ton of questions. I am seeking a lot of information, and that I balance rationality with humanity. And that means that I very much understand that sometimes we have to make the hard call. I'm the one to encourage sometimes that we terminate a position or we separate from an individual. And yet fully recognizing that these are people we're working with and they are fully human and have issues. And so really making sure that the feedback loop stays open so that no one is surprised by these things. And I think that's a challenge for some people when they work with me, because in previous relationships with a leader, when they've been told a certain thing, it means something, right? Oh, you're telling me this. You're actually trying to communicate this other thing. And I'm saying, no, just listen to the words I'm saying. That's what I'm communicating. I'm not playing a game. I'm not, conveying some other thing. And it can cause a level of distrust at first because they're sort of wondering when the other foot's going to fall, or
Right. Yep.
when I'm going to say, like, because I'll give them some negative feedback perhaps. And then they go, oh, well, terminate, you must be thinking, and I'm going, no, I just needed to give you that negative feedback so that we could work on it. And so anyway, that balance of understanding that we are here to do a job. We are not family. We are not here to act like friends. And yet I can recognize that you are showing up as a human, that you have a life, and that impacts the way you can show up to work.
Nice. And you talk about neurodivergence at work. That's a big thing lately.
Yeah.
And I've got friends that are ADHD, and it's one of those things that you don't want to come out and say I'm ADHD, but at the same time, I'm better working in the morning than I am in the evenings, right? I get tired, my brain starts going foggy and stuff. You don't want to say that because it makes you feel vulnerable. Maybe they're going to pick you off because this other guy is normal, right?
Right.
Quote unquote, and you're not. What are you seeing out there that makes that a piece of what you'd like to do?
Yeah, I think, neurodivergence is interesting because there's the formal neurodivergence where we're talking about diagnoses, right? Bipolar, autism, ADHD. And in some cases, we're seeing actually some self-identification become more of a thing, especially in the startup industry, of people going, look, I had to hide this in the corporate environment, or I had to hide this where I worked before. And I'm done with that. I need people to understand that these are the limitations I have, or that this is the best way I work. And being able to design an organization around that way of thinking is very important to them. So I think we're seeing a little bit more sort of awareness of, that people work differently. But then there's also what we might call, I think some people have labeled it neurospicy or neurosparkly, right? What they're trying to get at with these words that sound very sort of kitschy or, silly is that a lot of the CEOs I work with, they are neurodivergent in the sense that they think differently than the people who need to surround them to do the work. A lot of times, if you look at sort of your stereotypical group, you've got the CEO who is high innovator and the individual contributor who is high execution. And you need that. That is vital to the organization. And yet they speak different languages, right? So we talked about how HR and marketing speak different languages, but especially when you get to the way my brain thinks or the way I have to process information, it's extremely different from, a person who thinks about challenges from a extroverted point of view to an introverted point of view. And being able to account for all of that and just understand, yes, we do have all different working styles that we should account for, because that's how we get the best out of our people. An interesting component of all this, neurodivergent stuff that I've been looking into more recently is the concept of flow, and that this isn't just some sort of like woo concept. Scientifically, we can measure it, that the brain actually does certain things. And if we never take into account neurodivergence, we are asking people to work against their brain to do our best work. It's nonsensical. And so to acknowledge that ADHD people need certain supports, their executive functioning is harder. So if we ask them to rely on their own systems that we're not helping them build, we're asking them to do a lot of extra legwork that some other people don't have. I got diagnosed with ADHD after my daughter did, realizing that I hadn't done my research on what it presented like for women and females, and realizing, holy wow, that resonated much more than I expected to, because I'm a high performer. How can I be a high performer and have this negative, brain thing? And to be very clear, it is not a superpower either. I get very sensitive when people either think of it as a true detriment or as a true superpower. It can have phases of both, but honestly, if it is 100% superpower, I don't think you should have a diagnosis. I really don't, because the whole point of a diagnosis is it is in some ways going against what the norms of society are enough that it makes it very hard for you to interact with others. And so if you find that it's only a superpower for you, I question whether you truly have a neurodivergence or not. But the point is relying on how people think, really thinking through, you are an individual. This is how you think about a problem. This is how you communicate. And then understanding that from the other side of the table. you are a human being. This is how I hear. This is the filters I use to hear things. And when you match that together of let me think through what I say to make sure it's heard the right way because I know my audience, that's when the magic really starts to happen.
Yeah. But then trying to create that environment where people feel safe enough to say, I need the information a little bit differently, or I need to present it a little differently. I need a little time to process it before I come up with an answer. That's asking a lot of some leaders.
It really is. And I think that therein lies the rub, that our businesses are dependent on our people, and yet we've made them into widgets over time. We've sort of factorized office workers for so long, right? It's butts and seats, it's butts and seats, it's butts and seats.
Yeah.
No, those butts have lives. Those butts are dealing with trauma and complication and joy and all of these things. And, they struggle with certain things. Their brains are good at certain things and bad at other things. And if we treat them as interchangeable widgets, we will always fall short of getting the most out of our people.
Absolutely. 100%. This could be an entire podcast episode, just this,
Yeah.
I think it's that important. Really do. Tobey, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. If people want to get in touch with you and learn more about you, if they want to learn more about Motherlode and the things that you do and how you help businesses, where can they find that? I know your website is still kind of under construction, but
Yeah.
Can they reach you through their website?
I'm not sure right now whether you can reach me through the website. What I find is most people are going through LinkedIn anyway.
Okay.
So the nice thing is I have a nice unique name, Tobey Wyatt. You can search me up quite easily, and I'm really the only one who comes up under that search. And so LinkedIn message, somehow reaching out there. And then if you would like to just reach out more directly, Tobey@motherlode.biz is my email address. Happy to field any questions that way.
Very cool. Good job. All right. I will have all those links down in the show notes. And again, thank you so much for taking time out for us. This has been great.
Harlan, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, listeners, hope you guys are taking notes. A lot of good information here. I will probably have you back to talk about the neurodivergence. I've had several people. I've had a lady the other day talking about the difference between introverts and extroverts and how that impacts in the workplace and things. Maybe we'll just do a big panel discussion about what leaders can do to make this better for everybody. So we'll talk about that. Listeners, hope you guys are taking notes. Definitely check out the website, which should be up soon, and connect with Tobey on LinkedIn if you have any questions or anything like that. And share this episode with your family, friends, colleagues, and stick around because there's always more coming. That's it for me, Coach Harlan, saying so long for now.